This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is October 31st, 2020. Happy Halloween. And I'm producer Pat. We're going to turn you over to the Ottawa crew for the whole show today. Darren has another book review roundup telling us about 4 books that he recently read. But first, Adam is going to dig into whether sexual preference is an offensive term. I hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
What's up, cuboids? It's sometimes hard to keep up with what terms are in or out, but sometimes dictionaries can help us with that. Such is the recent controversy over the expression sexual preference. This was news to me, as I'd never heard of this term being offensive, so what's going on? Now, this all happened fairly recently. This occurred on Tuesday, October 13th, which is a bit over a week earlier than this episode was recorded. This was during the swearing-in of Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett. As she was nominated by Donald Trump, she is a Republican-assigned member, though a member of the Supreme Court does not necessarily have a party affiliation. Needless to say, this appointment is not liked by Democrats, such as Mazie Hirono, the Democratic United States Senator from Hawaii. Amy Coney Barrett used the term sexual preference, and was then criticized by Senator Mazie Hirono for this. She had originally said, and I quote, "I have never discriminated on the basis of sexual preference and would never discriminate on the basis of sexual preference." Senator Hirono later responded, and I quote again, "Even though you didn't give me a direct answer, I think your response did speak volumes. Not once but twice you used the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term. It is used by anti-LGBTQ activists to suggest that sexual orientation is a choice. It is not." So if it is your view that sexual orientation is merely a preference, as you noted, then the LGBTQ community should be rightly concerned whether you would uphold their constitutional right to marry. I don't think that you use the term sexual preference as just, "I don't feel it was an accident."
Dun dun dun. Yeah. So there's several things you're going to unpack here.
For sure. And what was her response? So if someone spoke to me like that, I wouldn't probably have anything nice to say to them.
But you want to be in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So you're going to say something nice or nothing at all.
But you know, if I didn't think that sexual orientation was a choice, I might defend that statement. What did the Republican appointed nominee say? Well, she apologized. "I certainly didn't mean, and would never mean, to use a term that would cause any offense in the LGBTQ community. So if I did, I greatly apologize for that. I simply meant to be referring to Obergefell's holding with respect to same-sex marriage." She certainly didn't need to apologize, which to me suggests Senator Hirono was wrong in claiming that this was deliberate on her part. But we can't really know what was going on behind people's minds when they make statements.
You never know.
Never know. So, sexual preference is an offensive term. Now, this is absolutely news to me. A bit over a year ago, in September 2019, I did a segment on the gay gene in which I argued that sexual orientation was largely genetic and predetermined. I used the term sexual preference 4 times. I did not receive any feedback from offended members of the LGBTQ community for my use of an outdated term. Granted, we don't always get feedback from every faux pas we make, but I've been taken to task before for conflating sex and gender or similarly using terms for which there are better alternatives. And I appreciate when we get that kind of feedback.
Is it also possible there's slightly less scrutiny for this podcast compared to a Supreme Court nomination?
I don't believe that.
Oh, okay.
Not for a moment.
Fair enough.
Now, I don't doubt that there are people out there who consider this to be an outdated and offensive term. Being offended by things is certainly something people have gotten very good at. Senator Hirono seems quite good at it herself. Now, let's be clear about what we're talking about here. The idea that sexual orientation is a choice is a bad one. This idea has rightfully been rejected for a very long time. I've been a strong proponent for the idea that sexual orientation is largely genetic. That said, the idea of someone being born this way can extend beyond genetics to development in the womb. And there's a strong link between neonatal hormone levels and sexual orientation, and genetics plays a big part in that, but also the mother's womb. So there are other factors at play here. Genetics is part of, but not necessarily the whole story, as we can find a strong correlation in sexual orientation between genetically identical twins, but there can still be some variation even among people with the exact same genes. You can have twins where one is gay, one is straight, for example. So a person's environment does seem to be a factor, though how exactly that works isn't clear, and this isn't to say it's a choice in any meaningful sense of the term. A person's sexual orientation can change throughout life as well, But again, that doesn't mean it's a choice, like when someone chooses what kind of ice cream they want to eat. A person no more chooses to be gay than they do to be straight, and asking someone when they chose to be straight kind of illustrates the absurdity of that idea. It's a pretty easy sort of thought experiment to give somebody. I am not disputing the concept of sexual orientation as being an immutable part of a person. I am questioning whether the term sexual preference is actually, as they like to say, problematic. An MSN article claims that many LGBTQ people take issue with the term. An American Psychological Association article from way back in 1991 states the following, and I quote, "The term sexual orientation is preferred to sexual preference for psychological writing and refers to sexual and affectional relationships of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and heterosexual people. The word preference suggests a degree of voluntary choice that is not necessarily reported by lesbians and gay men, and that has not been demonstrated in psychological research." So this is indeed a fairly old example showing that this idea has been around for a while, though I question just how mainstream it was, as I literally hadn't heard of that idea till last week. I accept that I may simply be ignorant about this topic. So what does the word preference actually mean? And does it suggest choice? Now, I always like to think about food, because everyone has food preferences, and they aren't thought of as being a choice. So I may choose what kind of sub I get at Subway, or what ice cream I get at Baskin-Robbins, but that choice is informed by a preference, which isn't something that I consciously choose. I like chocolate, but I don't think about when I decided to like chocolate. That concept is sort of absurd. You can't really rationalize it. I like chocolate just because I like it, and I can't really explain it. Maybe I'm born with a predisposition to sweet things. Certainly, that's an evolutionary explanation for why humans like fat, sweet things with caffeine in them, and then they might be attracted to chocolate. Maybe my upbringing influenced my preference a bit, associating chocolate or some other food with positive memories of foods I ate during my formative years. So in that sense, a preference for chocolate is different than an attraction to men or women, but it is generally something I don't force myself to prefer through some force of will. No one asked me when I decided to like chocolate. It's kind of a stupid question. It doesn't really make sense.
Correct. And I think in colloquial speech, it would be a stupid question. In a more scientific anthropological sense, or even philosophical, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
How does one come to learn to like anything? What is liking something versus a preference? Is it a choice or an orientation, as you hinted at?
So to me, preference doesn't suggest a voluntary choice, but I'm not a dictionary. So let's see what Webster's defines preference as. And I quote, 1A, the act of preferring, the state of being preferred. B, the power of opportunity of choosing. Interesting word. 2, one that is preferred. 3, the act, fact, or principle of giving advantages to some over others. 4, priority in the right to demand and receive satisfaction of an obligation. And 5, offensive. See usage paragraph below. Orientation, sense to be, sexual preference. So it's right there in the dictionary, so it must be offensive.
It's defined as offensive.
Yeah, actually, that was added last week. Previously, the last line simply read orientation, sense to be, sexual preferences. So that links to a definition of orientation, which includes B, a person's sexual identity or self-identification as bisexual, heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, etc., the state of being bisexual, heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, etc., sexual orientation. And then there's the definition of sexual orientation. I'm not going to go read the whole dictionary. Maybe there's another podcast for that. Now, the added offensive part links to the following. Usage of preference. The term preference, as used to refer to sexual orientation, is widely considered offensive in its implied suggestion that a person can choose who they are sexually or romantically attracted to.
They're like, what does the word widely mean, right? Well, amongst the group that may be offended, there's a large percentage that find it offensive, therefore it is widely offensive, versus perhaps you and me. Like, sorry, what's going on now? What?
Yeah, so widely is very debatable. And I think in the past week it's been widely debated. And I certainly think the events of the past week have certainly informed the sort of thoughts around this term and changed it. Mm-hmm. Worth noting, of course, that the actual definition, the one not from this week, but from last month, from last year, includes the power or opportunity of choosing. So there's your link between preference and choice, hence the attempt to avoid that term. So in the dictionary, they really use choice as a part of preference. So
yes,
that's where that
a lot of
from.
this is going to be like, do you consider one of these terms a subset of one of the other terms or not?
Yeah. And I think that depends on your, there's multiple definitions of it, and it depends on what what preference you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. What's your preference today? That's a different kind of thing than this is my preference, right? And that's how I feel about this thing always. And because people love hypocrisy, there are countless examples of supposedly progressive people using the term sexual preference to describe orientation very recently. A CNN article describing what gender fluid means uses the phrase, being gender fluid doesn't determine a person's sexual preference.
Oh, no.
Joe Biden, who's been in the news a bit recently, used the term sexual preference in May of this very year. He promised to, and I quote, rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, but this time bring everybody along regardless of color, sexual preference, their backgrounds. Surely we can find numerous other examples. I said the term frequently. I didn't think anything of it until this past week. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't attempt to be more careful in what we say. I'll certainly make an attempt to use orientation in this context, as mostly because of this incident, the term sexual preference now has a negative connotation amongst most people. That doesn't mean one should assume that a person using the term has some nefarious intention, or that it's a dog whistle or something like that. Use the context of what the person is saying to infer what they actually mean. The difficult part of always trying to be aware of the right thing to say is that when you become hyper aware of others using those same terms, you may uncharitably assume bad intentions when you hear some things, even if they're things that you've said before, even somewhat recently. Especially when you're talking about like 75-year-old people using some term, which people don't say that anymore.
Yeah, no kidding.
So try a little more of, by the way, some people don't like that term, and here are some good alternatives, and a little less, your response did speak volumes, and that is an offensive and outdated term. Sexual preference is a term which some people consider to be offensive, but that a lot of people use innocently without any intended disrespect. While the term may signal choice to some people, that doesn't mean that's what the person saying it actually thinks. Uttering and hearing the term will not drill into a person's subconscious and make them think that sexual orientation is a choice. That said, you might want to consider using the term sexual orientation in the future. Just try not to be so judgmental towards those who use it. Let's leave the judging to judges. You know, people like Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Well, that was a very cute ending, Adam. And you may not be surprised, but I have lots to say because this has to do with what do words mean.
Yeah.
So one of the first thoughts is that probably U.S. law, like Canadian law, has protections or statutes or language regarding sexual orientation as a protected category for something or another. Like human rights, sexual orientation. Yeah. Sexual preference is not in there. So in the political theater that is a Supreme Court nomination hearing, of course, there's point scoring. Of course, someone wants to get on TV. Of course, someone wants to be mad about something, or at least to stand up for what they believe in, you know, if we're going to be more charitable. So when she says sexual preference, that could be concerning because if you're not charitable, it could mean that she's not actually going to support sexual orientation. So that should be clarified.
Yeah. And so she's skirting around the real
you didn't say the language that we have in law, right? Because I'm pretty sure sexual preference is not in there.
Yep.
Then you said just because someone says it doesn't mean they'll believe it. Well, if everyone started using sexual preference, given how most people use the word preference, people might think it is more of a choice.
Absolutely. Maybe in a year, people using it will actually be an indication of their views because you kind of have to be hostile for it.
Well, now, yes, and now it's changed. Once, as you said, once something has changed, now it becomes understood to be one thing versus another thing.
Yeah.
So listeners will know that I generally don't think there's anything like counter-causal free will. So the idea that whether something's a preference or an orientation or a choice, there's certain degrees, we'll say, of a malleability or influence, but people cannot do otherwise. So that's the main point.
Yes.
So whatever they end up doing, that's what they are going to do. So why don't we just not be judgmental? Things aren't going to cause anyone problems. Sure. That said, we currently operate in an environment where generally people don't believe that. And we know strategically people have justifiably latched on to the idea that sexual orientation seems to be a genetic disposition. Yeah. And because people have a naturalism bias, because it's genetic, it's not changeable, therefore it's good.
Yeah.
And if that's what we're doing, that's what we're doing. So if orientation is preserved because it can't be changed, then you can't force people to change. You should accept them as they are. This, I think, is a broad stepping stone to, if someone's not hurting anyone, just let them do that thing anyway.
Yeah.
And why try to change someone's preference anyway if it's not hurting people? But in the current cultural context, yes, if it's genetic, it's safer, right, in terms of malleability. So therefore, we're not going to legislate or discuss it as much. But like you said, if suddenly you found out that you weren't genetically disposed to like chocolate, you just really like it due to cultural upbringing. Well, so, I mean, you still really want it. It still makes you happy and it doesn't seem to be hurting anyone, depending how the chocolate is made and collected and so on. I do think if you existed in a world where, as many people did, chocolate didn't exist, then you couldn't have liked chocolate. And then you could imagine it a different upbringing, because you said maybe it influenced you, but I think it definitely had to, in that broad sense of did it exist or not at a certain time in the world. And if you had a saturating experience with chocolate all the time, you made them like, maybe not. Or you're like, this is great. You know, your receptors got tuned to it. I love sweets as much as you, I think. And it makes my brain happy and therefore makes my soul happy. So yes, we're all products of both our environment and our genes, and that's saying nothing new. But it is interesting how words come to mean certain things. And in this realm of political theater, people are going to be very charged about what those things actually do mean.
Yeah, and I think there's this idea, and some people like to say, you know, whether it's a choice or not doesn't matter. You can still treat someone with respect, even if they did choose a sexual orientation, for example. But I think there are real world implications to the idea that it is mostly a born that way kind of sense, and that is the two main things to me are conversion therapy is extremely unethical and should not be practiced. And the other idea is people concerned with this idea that their children are being brainwashed into being gay or the gay agenda or something like that. So if you think it's cultural, if you think it's learned, then all of a sudden the people saying things like that might have a point. Versus, well, if you're kind of born with that, then that doesn't matter, right?
I agree with you, and that seems to generally be the case. But then we should also just be wary that if something seems to be very rare in a population of 1 to 5%, and another population starts tracking in at 20%, like, is there something else going on, right? Maybe not. But you're right. I do think all the points you raised are very valid. But of course, you can always come up with some example like, well, is it really the case in this particular case? And maybe not. But as a heuristic, I fully agree with you.
Yeah. So clearly words are important, and it'll be interesting to see how the term sexual preference is considered in, 6 months, a year, going forward based on this incident.
Looks like it's time for another Darren book roundup. 2 on Trump and 1 each by Saul, Alinsky, and Noam Chomsky. First, Rage by Bob Woodward came out earlier this year. So this was my first Woodward book, and very likely my last. There was no scholarship, analysis, or great insight. If you had watched late night comedy for the past year, you pretty much know the contents of the book. Further, the prose is nothing remarkable, and just describes a series of chronological events, often unconnected. Apparently, this is his style. Why anyone finds this appealing is confusing to me. Granted, his access and the recordings of Trump discussing COVID-19 are of value, but you've already gotten that from the news, so there's no point reading the book.
So it's news that covered what was released in the book?
Yeah. News covered it, yeah.
Sure.
Perhaps if you didn't pay attention to the news at all and you wanted a quick primer of what's happened over the past couple of years, maybe.
Yeah.
Now, I tried to find value on the meta level, but because my expectations were clearly too high, I kept feeling a bit of vicarious embarrassment.
Wow.
like, this counts as a book? Do not recommend.
All right.
Well, so Woodward is famous Woodward and Bernstein, Watergate, right? He's written books about presidents. I think he wrote something like 4 on George W. Bush. He wrote 2 on Obama. This is the second one about Trump. I'm like, okay, this guy, he's in it. Like, this is the guy. And so I thought it'd be great, and it wasn't.
Okay, so I got an idea. In 30 years, would you maybe give this book to someone who was not alive or not paying attention to the current events of today, or maybe in another country, to kind of give them an overview?
I mean, you could, but I believe some sort of futuristic VR Wikipedia would be better.
Yeah, right. Just inject the thoughts.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Take this pill. You'll then learn and then forget what happened. Oh, excellent.
It was the blue pill. It was full of lies.
Yeah, exactly. That's number 1. Okay, the second one about Trump is Disloyal by Michael Cohen. His personal lawyer. So this is the story of one terrible person by another terrible person about operating in the sleazy parts of the world. Cohen is a manipulative, deceitful bully that would engage in any tactics, including illegal ones, to achieve his goals. Why believe him when he says Trump is the same? Well, mainly, Cohen is at least as trustworthy as Trump, if not more, based on everything in the public record, because Trump lies all the time. Sure. In various ways, in terms of how Trump treats his family, he's even worse than Cohen is. Cohen also mistreated his family, but seems to have some sensibility of human-to-human connection, while Trump doesn't, at least in terms of being portrayed.
Wow.
Yeah, the reader learns of Trump acting a bit like a mob boss. There are no emails, no records, no direct instructions, just insinuations and implicit understandings of what would be done.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. Now, I don't want to be too hyperbolic. There's no evidence that Trump is suggesting people should be whacked or any sort of extreme violence of that case. But when there comes to be dealings which need to get done, which may not be legal, it's implied, like, you should go take care of this. Or what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
This sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
I knew Trump pretty much sees everything through the lens of power and money, but I forgot that he's so unstrategic that he won't pay people what he owes them, even when it's going to harm him. Mm-hmm. So, for example, his friend worked at the National Enquirer, which would often squash stories about him. Okay. It's like the catch and kill thing. So, someone has a story that's bad about Trump. The National Enquirer buys the story from the person, gets the legal rights, so the person can't sell it, and the National Enquirer never runs it.
Wow.
And sometimes,
but they want a kickback for it.
Well, they should, yes, it's some sort of recompense, right?
Yeah.
And this was what sort of happened, but once he's like, no, I'm not paying for that. And you're like, but he's helping you out. Why would you do that? Like, here's the exact absurdity of a story. So there was some poll, let's say it's CBS or something like this, about popular business leaders of the past 25 years. The exact details are not important. The gist is that there's some ranking, and Trump is 197 out of 200, and he wants to be number one. And there's an online poll, so people can vote. And he's like, Cohen, I want to do better on this. And he's like, let me go talk to a guy I know. So he phones up a guy who works in media, digital stuff, computer hacking, science, and so on. He's like, well, the guy's like, well, it looks like it's simple. I got the backdoor stuff. If we buy 100,000 IP addresses, we can probably bump them up. Be $7,500 if you want to try it. Cohen's like, let me go talk to the boss. Goes like, hey, look, we got this deal, $7,500. You want to try it? And he's like, okay, get it done. All right. So they try it. And yeah, he's moved up to like 25 within a week or two. And Trump's like, I want to be number one. Cohen's like, you don't want to be number one. You're going to get too much attention. We'll make you number 9. Yeah. That's the thing. But it's going to cost another $7,500. Okay, fine. And so he's like, the day before he's like 11. He's like, don't worry. We know it's going to be 9, right? Yeah. Day the poll closes, Trump is 9. Perfect. He's really happy, right?
Great.
He even prints it out and he has it in his office and he hands it to people who visit him that shows he's number 9. This is the world. So he's on some level, Cohen's like, I think he starts to believe he's legitimately number 9, even though
there's a pride in something that you didn't.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Now, whoever ran the poll had some fine print that said they could just kind of manipulate the poll however they want. So they just pulled Trump's name. Didn't say doing anything wrong, but they had the right to remove people's names from the list. Sure. And they probably thought, well, there's no way Trump really did that. So they just pulled his name. So now Trump's not on the list. He's very unhappy about all this.
Yeah.
And
still got the printouts.
Well, he still got the printouts. Yep. When it comes time to pay the guy, he's like, well, it didn't work though. I'm not on the list.
Oh, really?
And Michael Cohen's like, he's a friend of mine. Like, I asked this guy. And also, it's $15,000.
Yes.
This is a man who supposedly has billions of dollars.
It's like me buying a chocolate bar, right?
Right. We talked about this. Bezos. So it's like, this man did the work for you that you asked. You okayed it. And that's why Cohen asked him. But he's like, I'm not paying him. No. And so he's like, well, so the logic, at least initially, is, well, because if this person did this thing, which is sketchy, if not illegal, you don't want the payment to occur too close to the date in which you did the thing.
Sure.
So you do it next year or something. Same thing with Stormy Daniels. Quick story. Trump had sex with a porn star. She was going to come forth with the story. Initially, she signed a waiver saying it wasn't happening. And then she was going to come forward again because now Trump was running for president. It was close to the election. Michael Cohen sets up a company where the woman can be paid off. No one is willing to pay her off. Well, it can't come from Trump, of course. Like, he can't actually sign the check. He can't have a paper trail. Sure. So then one of his financial advisors is talking to Cohen about this. Cohen's like, why don't you do it? And the guy's like, I'm not doing it. Why don't you do it? And this is how Cohen actually ended up paying his own money.
Wow.
Well, through this fake company, $130,000, right? And then, of course, Trump's not going to pay Cohen back either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then what happens is when the time for bonuses come around, and then Cohen is also now going to be Trump's personal attorney when he's won the election, he will then be paid a certain salary. Sure. And they negotiated this beforehand, which would be like something like $480,000 was his bonus. Now, some of that money is related to this $130,000.
So maybe you'd have gotten $350,000 otherwise.
Well, but the point is now it counts as payroll over the year. Cohen's kind of being paid his own money, right?
Yeah.
And now Trump actually can treat it as payroll and then it's tax deductible.
It's tax deductible for Trump, not for Cohen, but Cohen's probably doing a bunch of tax stuff anyway.
Well, certainly, but it just shows that someone does a personal payment, which is completely, illegitimate in terms of business-wise, then he's going to be paid back sort of his own money, but then it's paid back from someone else, and that person gets a tax deduction. Yeah. So this is the world that you're in, right? There were some decent explorations about how people can drink the Kool-Aid and believe their own lies. Nothing truly revelatory, but of some value, and it was a very easy book to finish.
Sure.
In short, like, shame on all of them, really. I mean, you read about this, and I don't know if you know the TV show Billions. It's great, but the book is a lot less fun because this stuff is real. All right, book number 3, Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. This was a great book. Given it was written about 50 years ago,
Wow.
I expected it to be out of date. Also, as it is for radicals, I expected it to be more about passion than reason. I was wrong on both accounts. While, of course, today's battleground is social media and not other types of organizing that were more likely to occur 50 years ago, the analyses of power and social dynamics and the importance of communication and diversity of tactics are timeless. Alinsky is eminently reasonable, and I can understand why he was so popular and successful. For example, he clearly communicates that you have to polarize people to get them motivated, and nuanced understanding doesn't work at all. Yet, during negotiations, you're often looking for a relatively small change, and then you have to live peacefully afterwards. I'm not sure these things are easily reconciled, but to have someone who understands the game so clearly, he's like, yes, of course. If people aren't polarized, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to march. They're not going to act this way. And so you really do the in-group, out-group, this person is horrible and we're angels and all that sort of thing. But like, yeah, we want a 5% change in this rate.
Sounds like we're using the wrong strategies.
Yeah. He is also very creative regarding different ways to challenge power. So, for example, this is, again, decades ago, but there was an issue whether there were enough black people that were allowed to be in a certain store, okay? Mm-hmm. And so he's like, well, I'm going to have a large number of black people go into the store and just ask normal questions you might ask if you're in a store, like, oh, does this come in a different color? Sure. Do you have this? Do you have something like this in the back? And if you have 3,000 people dressed nicely, asking these questions, white people go to enter the store, they're like, oh, and they just like turn away, and they would just clog the store, right? And it would then just kind of shut down business. It might have been Macy's even for a day. And then, strategically, Macy's is now notified of this through, back channels. And he's like, let's go to the bargaining channel. Let's make sure this doesn't happen, because they don't want this. They know it's going to cause a huge problem. And so you can address these sorts of things.
Wow.
Yeah. He also would treat people with honesty in a way that I haven't heard a lot of negotiators treat with honesty. So he tells a story when he was actually in Canada talking with various indigenous groups about trying to get some sort of mobilization for something. And his point was, he's like, well, how many people total could be involved in this? We have to unite everyone. And they're like, no, we don't, those are like the white man's tactics. We don't really want to do that. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, we're just trying to amass more people, which is then more likely to succeed. He's like, well, when we say go fishing, we're really connecting with nature and the water and the animals and the life. And he's like, well, when we go fishing as white people, we're not in Times Square. We're also in nature, right? And the guy sort of kept saying like, no, but it's different because of this. And he's like, I think that's bullshit. And he just said it to their face.
Yeah.
And as opposed to them going, oh, well, they might have done that, but then they said, oh, finally someone's treating us like an equal.
Okay.
He's actually telling us what he thinks. And he's going to not pretend that he doesn't agree with us when he actually disagrees with us.
Yeah.
So there's actually a National Film Board documentary being filmed at this time about his life. And this clip is now shown. And some indigenous people held up like, look, see, a white person was honest. There's another example where he was somewhere and they're, serving like traditional Mexican food or something like that, right? And he's like, do you guys eat this stuff all the time? It's terrible. Right? He's like, well, you would never say that because it's offensive, right? Yes. And then at least a couple of them are like, yeah, we don't like it either. We just do this stuff because it's a formal thing and this is what we feel we're supposed to do. And you're like, well, what a character.
Wow.
Anyway, so the book was smarter and more worthwhile than I expected, and I could definitely see value in rereading parts of it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And finally, What We Say Goes by Noam Chomsky. This was a collection of columns written by Chomsky between 2011 and 2014, and it's a short book which was a useful reminder of Chomsky's view of the world. Now, if someone has never read anything by Chomsky, I wouldn't start here, but I appreciated the reiteration of his outlook and examples. I've read many books by Chomsky and I like them. So this is generally Chomsky's shtick, which is repeated throughout this book. Mm-hmm. U.S. aggression, by this they mean sort of military force and aggression, but aggression has a specific term, but just think of it as acting like a bad state against another state or people. U.S. aggression is a continued problem in the world and is inconsistent with its core stated principles. Much of the rest of the world thinks the United States is a greater threat to global security than Iran. I remember Iran was more of a significant thing in the headlines in 11, 12, 13. Mm-hmm. Iran and other Middle Eastern countries would support a non-nuclear safe zone in the Middle East, but it won't happen because Israel won't sign up because Israel has nukes and the United States wants them to still have nukes. The U.S.-backed support of Israel's treatment of Palestinians is terrible and ongoing. Climate change is real, urgent, and it seems neither corporations nor politicians care. The U.S. continually violates standards and principles, legal, economic, social, etc. it expects other countries to uphold. and most political leaders do not follow the will of the people on various issues. So if you've read some Chomsky, you're like, oh yeah, that's what he always says. So there's nothing new, but there's still some value here. Sure. I think Chomsky's critiques are generally correct. But, after reading so much, it would be interesting to see him do an analysis of the pros and cons of America and not just the cons. Because that's not what he does.
Sure.
Now, I think he would say, not only is that unnecessary, it's problematic. It may even be unethical. Because he might say something like, well, all these other people say it's great all the time. You need to actually have someone say.
So he wants to put some level of bound. It depends on what circle you're in, and it depends who your influences are.
Most Americans believe their country is great and doesn't commit atrocities, I think.
And doesn't, yes.
Well, they'll think, so your founding belief was that you got rid of millions of native people, and then you mucked around in a lot of countries on Earth over all the decades, and you took all this territory and did all these things. And so it is part of the history. It's not that people aren't aware of it at all, and it doesn't mean there's nothing good about America, because it's certainly a lot better than many other places on Earth. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's just how Chomsky does things.
Sure.
And just want to mention, this book is freely available on his website.
Cool.
So those were 4 books, 2 on Trump, 1 on Alinsky, 1 on Chomsky. The Woodward one you can skip. The Cohen one, if you're looking for some sleazy infotainment. The Alinsky one, definitely. Chomsky, just read some articles.
Yeah. Read some of his other stuff, sounds like.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.